Good evening, Warhammer YouTubers. Just a quick response to Vince Venturella's topic of the week about factions in Age of Sigmar. And what do we think about all the different new factions that are occurring in the game as they continue to release more books? So the impetus behind this is the Grand Alliance book of Chaos, in which there are 21 different factions listed. Essentially divisions based upon the keywords. Now, Tom, Vince's co-host, has described this in Orcs and Goblins as a type of a ghettoization. So he's a little bit negative on it, or at least that's how he has been in past weeks. I've been in the hobby a fair number of years. I've seen a lot of this division before, so I don't really think it's that different. I'll talk about, why I think that's the case. But Chaos in particular has undergone this type of transition many times, but perhaps not quite to this extent. So when I got into fantasy, Hordes of Chaos was the Chaos book, and that was Chaos Warriors, Demons, Beastmen, the whole thing as a single army. And then they released the Beasts of Chaos book, and that was Beastmen with bigger beasts, trolls, ogres, dragon ogres, kind of like the weird type of monsters, spawns and things like that. Then they did Demons as their own distinctive book, and then they did Beastmen on their own without the monsters, so no more ogres and trolls. So Chaos, I think, has always gone through this transition. Now, they do seem to be rolling out this type of division for all the other armies. I think that that's probably going to happen because it's based upon the keywords. So we know that there are several different keywords for vampire counts, and so the new Death Book, that's what we're anticipating will look like that. And certainly the amount of scrolls in the Death Book are a lot less, so it looks like Tombkins has been removed. But anyways, as a long-time collector, this is how I divide up my collection. I divide it by faction. Because when you start going big, I think you tend to want not just, a massive chaos army, but you want to have each distinct faction separate and have their own unique armies. So eventually I would have loved to have had a Marauder army of just Marauders, Marauder Cav, a couple Marauder heroes, things like that. A distinctly Chaos Warrior collection, Chosen, Chaos Knights. And of course for bigger battles you'd combine those. Orcs are definitely how I've always done that. I loved the look of like a pure Night Goblin army. Or pure army of goblins in general. And the Orcs and Goblins are about, 6 or so distinct factions. They really have always been. Now, there was nothing that really stopped you from mixing and combining things. But I've always liked the idea of having distinct armies on the table. And, sorry. My attitude essentially hasn't really changed. Those older books are basically that have always existed. They were always combined into a single army book. I think that's the biggest difference. Now you can go beyond those books, so you could take something like orcs that have always been divided into several different categories, and even if you want to just stick within the same alliance, you could take some ogres as well. And I think that that's really cool. In general, I think we need to look at the more alliance system and look for more themed armies, more fluffy. And I think as more AoS releases come out, they'll be more flushed and better represented. AoS basically took off the reins, and you can just do essentially what you want. So something like under a new alliance system, Slaanesh and Dark Elves, two armies that were always intrinsically connected. In fact, there used to be a Dark Elf army they never had Slaanesh units explicitly in it, but it was a Slaanesh Dark Elf army. Now you can just deliberately combine the two. You can really do whatever you want. I personally think that as long as you have a good story behind it, go for it. So more variety. The more variety we see on the table, I think, can only be a good thing. Not just in terms of the game, but in terms of modeling and painting and just creating your own unique army. Could you go too far? Could you just combine everything as a mishmash? Yeah, probably. But I think as you have a good story, in general, personally, I'm going to stick to those unique alliance systems, and probably just make armies specifically for that. Use keywords as a guide, essentially. But I could definitely see myself doing more of an alliance system, because some armies are very much all hand to hand. Why not take a couple ranged units with those, just to kind of give yourself some more variety? And it's the same thing in 40k, right? This is a great way for GW to increase its volume of model sales too, because you're not just pigeonholed into just collecting one thing. The minute that you try a different army, bring it in, you might bring in a whole unit in, you might think, hey, these guys are really cool, I'm going to start collecting these as well. Just balloons out. There are a couple of disadvantages. Command words don't go into other factions, right? So if you have a Khorne general, his command ability might not affect Nurgle or Slaanesh, or certainly probably won't affect Skaven necessarily. There probably are a few general command abilities that do affect everything. Anything that affects Battle Shock will. But most of the units themselves are about the same thing. They only really affect related, Night Goblin abilities really only affect Night Goblins, things like that. But I look at that as being a problem only if you're in a point system. The minute they take away points, it's not an issue, because you're not concerned about trying to maximize things within a very restricted environment. It just becomes so much more fluid, and I really love seeing all the different possibilities in the game. If you're using a comp system, maybe there's some wiggle room there with how those abilities are working. But I still think you're probably going to find more advantages from mixing and matching than you will from purely playing a vanilla. That said, as I said, Puritan armies are very cool. I think they have unique themes. I love the look of them. I'm perfectly fine with just having a pure Night Goblin army or a pure Black Orc army. So we'll see. But overall, I think it's a good thing to have more and more factions. I certainly don't think there's really any possible way that you could view it necessarily as being particularly negative. But we'll see. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good one.